Today, we're exploring a topic that's been keeping economists and policymakers awake at night: the provinces facing the most severe economic challenges in 2025. Now, let's uncover which Canadian provinces are struggling the most economically this year. Number 10. Prince Edward Island. Canada's smallest province is facing disproportionately large economic hurdles that threaten its very foundation. Here's something that might shock you. Despite its picturesque tourism appeal, PEI has one of the highest unemployment rates among Canadian provinces, sitting at over 8% as we enter 2025. The province's economy, heavily dependent on seasonal industries like tourism, fishing, and agriculture, creates a perfect storm of economic instability. When winter arrives, thousands of workers find themselves without employment, creating a cyclical poverty trap that's becoming increasingly difficult to escape. The potato farming industry, once a reliable backbone, has been devastated by climate change effects, with unpredictable weather patterns destroying crops and threatening farmer livelihoods. But here's what makes this even more concerning. Young people are leaving the island at an alarming rate. The youth exodus means fewer working-age individuals to support an aging population, creating a demographic time bomb. Housing costs have paradoxically skyrocketed despite the economic struggles, making it nearly impossible for young families to establish roots. The average home price has increased by 40% since 2020, while wages have remained relatively stagnant. The ripple effects extend beyond individual families. Small businesses that form the heart of PEI's communities are closing at unprecedented rates, unable to sustain operations during the harsh economic winters. This creates a domino effect where fewer services are available, making the province even less attractive for potential residents or businesses looking to relocate. What's particularly heartbreaking is watching generations of islander families forced to make impossible choices between staying in their beloved homeland and pursuing economic opportunities elsewhere. But PEI's challenges pale in comparison to what's happening in our next province. Number 9. New Brunswick. The Maritimes continue to struggle, and New Brunswick exemplifies the broader economic crisis gripping eastern Canada. Here's a startling reality that many don't realize. New Brunswick has the highest percentage of minimum wage workers in all of Canada, with nearly 1 in 4 employees earning at or near minimum wage. The province's economic foundation is crumbling beneath decades of over-reliance on natural resources and traditional manufacturing. The forestry industry, once the province's pride, has been decimated by mill closures and international competition. Major employers like paper mills have shuttered their doors, leaving entire communities economically stranded. Towns like Miramichi and Bathurst have become symbols of industrial decline, with unemployment rates hovering around 12%. What makes New Brunswick's situation particularly dire is the brain drain phenomenon. The province loses approximately 2,000 university graduates annually to other provinces, creating a vicious cycle where the most educated and capable individuals seek opportunities elsewhere. This leaves behind an aging workforce with limited skills to adapt to the modern economy. The healthcare system is collapsing under the weight of an aging population and insufficient healthcare workers. Many communities have lost their local doctors, forcing residents to travel hours for basic medical care. This healthcare crisis further discourages young professionals from considering New Brunswick as a viable place to build their careers and families. Perhaps most concerning is the province's debt situation. New Brunswick carries one of the highest per capita debt loads in Canada, limiting the government's ability to invest in infrastructure, education, or economic diversification programs. Every dollar that could be used for economic development is instead servicing existing debt, creating a financial straitjacket that's tightening year by year. The social fabric of communities is unraveling as economic opportunities disappear. Main streets, once bustling with local businesses, now feature empty storefronts and for lease signs. But even New Brunswick's challenges seem manageable compared to the crisis unfolding in our 8th province. Number 8. Nova Scotia. The Ocean Province is drowning in economic turmoil that extends far beyond its struggling fishing industry. Here's an eye-opening fact that highlights the severity of the situation. Nova Scotia has experienced negative net migration for 5 consecutive years, meaning more people are leaving than arriving despite immigration efforts. Halifax, the province's economic engine, cannot generate enough opportunities to sustain the entire province. Outside the capital region, rural Nova Scotia is experiencing what economists call economic desertification, the systematic withdrawal of services, businesses, and opportunities that leaves communities economically barren. Small towns that once thrived on fishing, mining, or forestry are now ghost towns with aging populations and crumbling infrastructure. The housing crisis in Nova Scotia presents a unique paradox. While rural areas see property values plummet due to lack of demand, Halifax experiences a severe affordability crisis that's pushing middle-class families to the breaking point. Young professionals face an impossible choice: remain in expensive Halifax with limited career growth or move to affordable rural areas with no economic opportunities. What's particularly devastating is the impact on the province's cultural identity. Traditional industries that defined Nova Scotian communities for generations are disappearing. Fishing communities that date back centuries are watching their way of life vanish as fish stocks decline and regulations tighten. The closure of coal mines in Cape Breton has left entire regions economically devastated, with unemployment rates exceeding 15% in some areas. The province's education system is also under severe strain. Rural schools are closing due to declining enrollment as families relocate to urban centers or leave the province entirely. This creates educational deserts where children must travel extraordinary distances for schooling, further encouraging family relocation and accelerating rural decline. Healthcare access has become a luxury rather than a right in many Nova Scotian communities. The province faces a critical shortage of family doctors, with over 100,000 residents lacking access to primary care. Emergency rooms regularly close due to staffing shortages, forcing residents to drive hours for urgent medical attention. This healthcare crisis makes Nova Scotia increasingly unattractive for families and contributes to the ongoing population exodus. But the challenges facing Nova Scotia are just a preview of the economic disaster unfolding in our 7th province. Number 7. Manitoba. The Prairie Province finds itself trapped in an economic perfect storm that's reshaping its demographic and economic landscape. Here's a shocking statistic that reveals the depth of Manitoba's crisis. The province has the 2nd highest child poverty rate in Canada, with over 28% of children living below the poverty line. Winnipeg, despite being Manitoba's largest city and economic center, struggles with issues that make it one of Canada's most challenging urban environments. The city has consistently ranked among the worst in Canada for quality of life indicators, including crime rates, infrastructure quality, and economic opportunities. Downtown Winnipeg faces a retail apocalypse, with major stores and businesses abandoning the core, leaving behind empty buildings and reduced foot traffic. The province's agricultural sector, traditionally a source of stability, faces unprecedented challenges from climate change and market volatility. Extreme weather events, including devastating floods and severe droughts, have created boom and bust cycles that make farming increasingly unsustainable for smaller operations. Many family farms that operated for generations have been forced to sell to large agricultural corporations, disrupting rural communities and concentrating wealth in fewer hands. Manitoba's geographic isolation compounds its economic challenges. Unlike provinces with access to major shipping routes or proximity to large American markets, Manitoba struggles with transportation costs that make its products less competitive. The province's manufacturing sector has steadily declined as companies relocate to areas with better market access and lower operating costs. What's particularly troubling is the province's struggle with Indigenous economic integration. Despite having one of Canada's largest Indigenous populations, systemic barriers prevent full economic participation, creating a substantial portion of the population that remains economically marginalized. This represents not just a social justice issue, but a significant waste of human capital that the province desperately needs. The brain drain from Manitoba is accelerating, with young professionals increasingly viewing the province as a stepping stone rather than a permanent home. University of Manitoba graduates frequently relocate to Toronto, Vancouver, or Calgary immediately after graduation, taking their education and potential contributions with them. This creates a scenario where Manitoba invests in education but loses the return on that investment to other provinces. However, Manitoba's struggles pale in comparison to the economic catastrophe unfolding in our 6th province. Number 6. Saskatchewan. The land of living skies is experiencing an economic storm that's fundamentally altering its identity and future prospects. Here's a staggering reality that illustrates Saskatchewan's predicament. The province has experienced the steepest decline in business investment among all Canadian provinces, with a 35% decrease over the past 3 years. Saskatchewan's economy, built on the foundation of natural resources, is crumbling as global markets shift away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy. The province's oil industry, once a source of prosperity that attracted workers from across Canada, now faces an uncertain future as environmental regulations tighten and international demand for oil decreases. Communities like Lloydminster and Kindersley, which boomed during the oil expansion, now face massive unemployment and economic uncertainty. The agriculture sector, Saskatchewan's other economic pillar, confronts challenges that threaten its long-term viability. Climate change has brought increasingly unpredictable weather patterns, with severe droughts followed by devastating floods. The 2024 growing season saw crop failures across vast areas of the province, bankrupting farmers and devastating rural communities. What's even more concerning is that these extreme weather events are becoming the new normal rather than exceptional circumstances. Potash mining, once considered Saskatchewan's economic ace in the hole, faces intense international competition and market volatility. Major potash operations have scaled back production and laid off thousands of workers as global demand fluctuates and new competitors enter the market. The province's heavy reliance on this single commodity has proven to be an economic vulnerability rather than a strength. The demographic crisis in Saskatchewan is particularly acute in rural areas. Small towns that once served thriving agricultural communities are disappearing as farms consolidate and mechanization reduces labor needs. Schools, hospitals, and essential services are closing, creating a cascade effect that makes rural life increasingly unsustainable. Young people leave for education and never return, creating a population structure heavily skewed toward older residents. What makes Saskatchewan's situation particularly tragic is the loss of economic optimism that once defined the province. The entrepreneurial spirit and can-do attitude that characterized Saskatchewan during its boom years has been replaced by resignation and uncertainty. Local businesses struggle to find customers as discretionary spending evaporates, and the hospitality industry faces a devastating decline in both business and leisure travel. But even Saskatchewan's economic challenges seem modest compared to the crisis engulfing our 5th province. Number 5. Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada's easternmost province, is experiencing an economic collapse that threatens its very existence as a viable economic entity. Here's a jaw-dropping fact that reveals the severity of the crisis. Newfoundland and Labrador has the highest unemployment rate in Canada at over 14%. And this figure doesn't account for underemployment and those who have given up looking for work entirely. The province's economy was built on the promise of offshore oil, but that foundation is crumbling faster than anyone anticipated. Oil production from major fields like Hibernia and Terra Nova is declining, and new discoveries are increasingly rare and expensive to develop. The global shift toward renewable energy means that even existing oil reserves may become stranded assets, worthless in a world moving away from fossil fuels. What's particularly devastating is the impact on rural communities outside of St. John's. Small towns that survived for centuries on fishing and forestry are dying slow, painful deaths. The cod moratorium that began in the 1990s was supposed to be temporary, but fish stocks have never recovered. Entire communities built around fishing have been abandoned, with houses selling for dollars or simply left to decay. The province faces a demographic catastrophe that's unprecedented in Canadian history. Newfoundland and Labrador's population has been declining consistently for over a decade, with young people leaving at such a rapid rate that some communities have more houses than people. The median age is rising quickly, creating a scenario where an aging population requires increasing healthcare and social services while the tax base shrinks. Infrastructure in Newfoundland and Labrador is literally crumbling. Roads, bridges, and public buildings suffer from decades of deferred maintenance, but the province lacks the financial resources to address these critical needs. The Trans-Canada Highway through Newfoundland has sections that are barely passable, yet repairs would cost billions the province doesn't have. The education system faces impossible choices. Rural schools are closing due to declining enrollment, forcing children to travel hours for education or relocate to urban areas. Memorial University, once a source of pride and economic activity, struggles with funding cuts and declining enrollment as students choose institutions in provinces with better economic prospects. Perhaps most heartbreaking is watching centuries-old communities simply disappear. Places where families lived for generations are becoming uninhabitable as economic opportunities vanish and essential services withdraw. The province's unique culture and dialect, shaped by isolation and maritime tradition, risk being lost as the population disperses to other provinces. Yet even Newfoundland's dire situation pales compared to the economic disaster unfolding in our fourth province. Number 4. Quebec, Canada's second-largest province by population, faces an economic reckoning that could reshape the country's entire economic landscape. Here's a startling revelation that most Canadians don't realize. Quebec receives over 60% of all federal equalization payments, totaling more than $13 billion annually, yet still struggles with fundamental economic challenges that threaten its long-term sustainability. The province's language laws, while protecting French culture, have created significant economic barriers that drive businesses and investment elsewhere. Major corporations have relocated their head offices from Montreal to Toronto or Calgary to avoid the complexities and costs of operating in a French-first environment. This brain drain of corporate leadership has hollowed out Montreal's status as a major business center, leaving it increasingly dependent on government jobs and subsidies. Quebec's demographic time bomb is ticking louder than in any other province. The birth rate has plummeted below replacement level, while an aging population creates enormous pressures on health care and social services. The province's generous social programs, once a source of pride, are becoming financially unsustainable as the ratio of workers to retirees continues to decline. Manufacturing, once Quebec's economic backbone, has been devastated by competition from lower-cost jurisdictions and the shift towards service-based economies. Textile factories, furniture manufacturers, and other traditional industries have closed by the hundreds, leaving former industrial towns like Shawinigan and Trois-Rivières economically devastated. The closure of major employers creates ripple effects that destroy entire local economies. What's particularly concerning is Quebec's growing economic dependence on federal transfers. Despite having significant natural resources and a large population, the province consistently requires billions in federal support to maintain basic services. This dependence creates political tensions with other provinces and raises questions about long-term fiscal sustainability. The province's infrastructure deficit is staggering. Roads, bridges, and public transit systems require hundreds of billions in investment, but the province lacks the fiscal capacity for such expenditures. The deteriorating infrastructure reduces economic competitiveness and quality of life, creating a downward spiral that's difficult to escape. Quebec's unique position as a distinct society within Canada creates additional economic complications. The constant political uncertainty around sovereignty and federal-provincial relations makes businesses hesitant to invest long-term in the province. Every election cycle brings renewed discussions about separation, creating an environment of uncertainty that's toxic for business confidence. But Quebec's complex challenges are overshadowed by the economic catastrophe facing our third province. Number 3. British Columbia. The province marketed as beautiful British Columbia is experiencing an economic crisis that contradicts its natural beauty and resource wealth. Here's an alarming fact that exposes the depth of BC's problems. Despite having some of Canada's highest wages, British Columbia also has the highest cost of living, creating a situation where middle-class families struggle more than in any other province. Vancouver, once considered one of the world's most livable cities, has become synonymous with housing unaffordability. The average home price exceeds $1.8 million, making homeownership impossible for most working families. Young professionals and families are fleeing the city in unprecedented numbers, creating a hollowing out of the middle class that threatens the city's long-term economic viability. The province's forestry industry, historically its most important economic sector, is collapsing under multiple pressures. Softwood lumber disputes with the United States, mountain pine beetle infestations, and devastating wild. What makes BC's situation particularly tragic is the contrast between its potential and reality. The province possesses enormous natural resources, a strategic location for Pacific trade, and a highly educated population, yet fails to translate these advantages into broadly shared prosperity. Instead, wealth concentration has reached levels that create social instability and economic inefficiency. The cost of doing business in BC has risen to levels that drive companies to relocate to other provinces or countries. Commercial real estate costs, regulatory complexity, and high taxation create an environment that's hostile to business development. Even technology companies, once seen as BC's economic future, are increasingly choosing other locations for expansion and new facilities. British Columbia's aging population, combined with housing costs that prevent young families from settling, creates a demographic crisis that will accelerate in coming years. Healthcare workers, teachers, and other essential service providers cannot afford to live where they work, creating shortages that reduce quality of life and economic competitiveness. The province's dependence on real estate speculation and foreign investment has created an artificial economy that's vulnerable to sudden collapse. When these speculative bubbles burst, the economic devastation will affect every resident and business in the province. The warning signs are already visible in declining sales volumes and construction activity. However, even BC's mounting problems seem manageable compared to the economic disaster facing our second province. Number 2. Ontario, Canada's economic powerhouse, is experiencing cracks in its foundation that threaten to bring down the entire national economy. Here's a shocking reality that most Canadians haven't grasped. Ontario's manufacturing sector has lost over 400,000 jobs since 2000, representing the largest deindustrialization in Canadian history. The Greater Toronto Area, despite its gleaming towers and apparent prosperity, masks deep economic vulnerabilities. Housing costs have reached levels that make the region uncompetitive for business investment and unlivable for working families. Young professionals are increasingly choosing other cities or countries over Toronto, recognizing that their economic futures are brighter elsewhere. Ontario's electricity costs, among the highest in North America, have driven energy-intensive industries out of the province. Steel production, aluminum smelting, and chemical manufacturing have relocated to jurisdictions with cheaper, more reliable power. The province's mismanaged electricity sector continues to impose crushing costs on both consumers and businesses, making Ontario increasingly uncompetitive. The automotive industry, once Ontario's pride and the foundation of its middle class, faces an existential crisis. The shift toward electric vehicles threatens thousands of jobs in traditional automotive manufacturing, while new EV plants choose locations in other provinces or the United States. Major facilities in Windsor, Oshawa, and other auto-dependent communities face uncertain futures. What's particularly alarming is Ontario's fiscal situation. The province carries the largest debt load of any sub-national government in the world, with interest payments alone consuming billions that could otherwise be invested in infrastructure, education, or healthcare. This debt burden will constrain Ontario's economic options for generations to come. The healthcare system in Ontario is approaching collapse, with emergency room closures, surgical backlogs, and family doctor shortages reaching crisis levels. This healthcare crisis reduces quality of life and makes Ontario less attractive for business investment and talented workers. Companies considering expansion or relocation increasingly factor healthcare access into their decisions. Ontario's education system, once world-renowned, faces funding pressures and labor disruptions that threaten its quality and accessibility. University tuition has skyrocketed, while government support has declined, making higher education increasingly elitist rather than accessible. This educational decline will have long-term consequences for Ontario's economic competitiveness. The province's infrastructure deficit is massive and growing. The Gardiner Expressway, Union Station, public transit systems, and water treatment facilities all require billions in investment that the province cannot afford. This infrastructure crisis reduces productivity and quality of life while imposing hidden costs on businesses and residents. But even Ontario's mounting challenges pale compared to the economic catastrophe facing our #1 province. Number 1. Alberta. The province that once symbolized Canadian economic dynamism and opportunity now faces the most severe economic collapse in the country. Here's a devastating fact that captures the magnitude of Alberta's crisis. The province has gone from being Canada's wealthiest per capita to facing potential have-not status within a single generation, the fastest economic decline in Canadian history. Alberta's oil industry, which generated unprecedented wealth and attracted hundreds of thousands of workers from across Canada, is experiencing a terminal decline. International climate commitments, stranded pipeline projects, and the global transition to renewable energy have combined to create a perfect storm that's destroying the foundation of Alberta's economy. Oil sands projects that were profitable at $100 per barrel now struggle to break even at current prices. The ripple effects of oil industry decline are devastating every sector of Alberta's economy. Calgary's downtown core faces the highest office vacancy rates in North America, with gleaming towers standing empty as energy companies downsize or relocate. The city's residential real estate market has collapsed, with home values falling by 30% or more in many neighborhoods. What makes Alberta's situation uniquely tragic is the speed of the decline. Workers who earned six-figure salaries in the oil patch now face long-term unemployment with few transferable skills. Many are trapped in homes worth less than their mortgages, unable to relocate to find work elsewhere. The psychological impact of this economic whiplash has contributed to rising suicide rates and family breakdown. Rural Alberta faces complete economic devastation as oil and gas activity disappears from vast areas of the province. Small towns that boomed during the energy expansion now resemble ghost towns, with closed businesses, empty schools, and populations that have fled to other provinces. The infrastructure built to support oil industry activity sits unused and deteriorating. The province's fiscal situation is catastrophic. Alberta built its entire government structure around oil royalty revenues that have largely disappeared. The Heritage Savings Trust Fund, once worth over $17 billion, has been depleted to cover operating expenses. The province now faces massive deficits with no clear path to fiscal sustainability. Perhaps most devastating is the loss of hope and confidence that once defined Alberta. The entrepreneurial spirit and optimism that attracted ambitious Canadians from coast to coast has been replaced by despair and resignation. Young Albertans are leaving the province in record numbers, recognizing that their economic futures lie elsewhere. The brain drain is accelerating as the province loses its most educated and capable residents. Alberta's economic collapse affects the entire country. Federal equalization payments will need to flow to Alberta for the first time in generations, while the loss of oil royalties reduces federal revenues that support programs across Canada. The province that once carried the country's economy now threatens to drag it down. As we've seen from these 10 provinces, from the maritime provinces struggling with demographic decline to Alberta's catastrophic fall from prosperity, the challenges are enormous and interconnected. What's your take on these economic realities? Which province's situation surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of Canada's economic future. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos exploring solutions and opportunities in these challenging times. The economic landscape is changing rapidly, and staying informed is more important than ever.